In the winter of 1934, the air in Manhattan turned cold, but the atmosphere inside a rotting storage building by the East River was even colder. When Bumpy Johnson stepped into the room, the silence was heavy. 15 men wearing white masks froze. They stopped talking, they stopped breathing, and they gripped the pistols hidden under their white sheets. This secret group had gathered right on the border of Bumpy's turf, thinking they were safe in the shadows of his streets. The leader of the group stood up, his voice full of hate. He started to say that Bumpy had made a fatal error, but Bumpy didn't let him get another word out. What followed over the next 8 minutes became a ghost story told in the streets for decades. 15 men started that meeting, but only 3 left the building alive. Those 3 survivors spent every day after that wishing they had died too. That was the night Bumpy Johnson showed everyone that Harlem wasn't just a group of blocks, it was a throne room. And the man on the throne didn't take orders from anyone. To know why blood was spilled that night, you have to know how bad things were back then. The great money crash had crushed the neighborhood. Half the people in the area had no jobs. Families were being tossed into the street, and children were starving. The hooded group saw this pain as a chance to move in. People think that group only lived in the South, but by the mid-30s, they were everywhere. Places like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Black families had moved north for a better life, only to find the same monsters waiting for them. In this city, the hooded men couldn't march down the street in broad daylight or they would be killed on the spot. So, they acted like cowards. They sent scary notes under doors. They lit fires on top of apartment buildings at midnight. They broke the windows of local shops and ruined everything inside. There were never any witnesses, and the police never made a single arrest. Many of the cops were wearing those same white robes when they weren't in uniform. By the start of the year, the local leaders were terrified. Preachers talked about peace in church but kept shotguns under their beds. Shop owners had to pay for bodyguards. Mothers wouldn't let their kids walk to class alone. The fear was winning, and it felt like no one could fight back. But there was one man who wasn't afraid. At that time, Bumpy Johnson was only 28 years old. He had been living in those streets for nearly a decade, rising from a simple street fighter to a top leader in the local lottery games. But Bumpy wasn't like the other street bosses. He didn't just drain the neighborhood, he looked after it. When greedy landlords tried to kick families out into the snow, Bumpy covered their bills. When dirty officers tried to bully shopkeepers, Bumpy made sure those officers were moved to a different part of the city. If rival crews tried to take over his turf, Bumpy sent them to the hospital in a hurry. To the locals, he wasn't just a tough guy. He was a guardian. He was a man who grew up in the struggle, survived years behind bars, and understood that you don't ask for respect, you seize it. So, when the hooded men started scaring his people, Bumpy took it as a personal insult. On the afternoon of February 7, 1934, Bumpy was tucked away in the back office of the Blue Velvet, a lively music hall on 135th Street. That's when one of his best scouts, a man named Leo, walked in. Leo had a light complexion that allowed him to blend into white crowds, making him the perfect spy in a city where your skin color determined where you could stand. Leo looked on edge. He told Mr. Johnson he had urgent news. Bumpy waved him to a chair and told him to speak up. Leo explained that he had been shadowing a specific member of the hate group, a man named Arthur Miller, who had been dropping off threatening letters around the blocks. Leo had been on his tail for 3 nights. Bumpy listened closely as Leo described how Miller met up with a group of men in high-priced vehicles. Leo followed them to a deserted factory near the water, located on the industrial edge of 145th Street. He had counted 15 men entering the building for a secret gathering. Leo pulled a small pad from his pocket and showed Bumpy the details. The cars had plates from out of state, places like Delaware and Maryland. This wasn't just a few local troublemakers, this was a coordinated hit squad. Bumpy looked over the notes. 15 men, a secluded spot by the river. Far enough away to drown out screams, but close enough to the highway for a fast getaway. Bumpy asked if they were carrying anything. Leo told him they had a massive wooden cross, several jugs of fuel, and enough guns for a small army. This wasn't a debate, it was a war council. They were likely planning to strike many places at once: prayer houses, stores, or even private residences. Bumpy sat in silence for a moment, letting the facts sink in. He looked at Leo and told him he had done a great job. "That's plenty," Bumpy said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out $200, and pressed the cash into Leo's hand. "Now, I need you to develop amnesia. You weren't there tonight. You didn't track a soul. We clear?" Leo nodded, took the money, and vanished into the darkness, knowing exactly what kind of storm was about to break. For the next 2 hours, Bumpy sat in total silence in that dim back room. His top guys, men who had bled for him in the past, begged him to let them come along. They offered to bring a small army and enough heat to level a city block. Bumpy just shook his head. "This isn't a war of numbers," he told them softly. "This is about a statement. And that statement only counts if it comes from me alone." His right-hand man, a guy they called Detroit Slim, tried to talk sense into him. "Bumpy, use your head. You're talking about strolling into a den with 15 of those devils. They're strapped and looking for a fight. They'll blast you before you even clear the doorway." Bumpy just gave him a thin, icy smile, the kind of look that made even his friends shiver. "They aren't expecting a guest," he replied. "That's exactly why I'm the one walking out and they're the ones staying behind." At 11:30 p.m. on February 8th, Bumpy moved through the streets like a ghost. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and a dark hat, with a heavy overcoat hiding the tools he had brought for the job. The temperature had plunged to nearly 20 degrees, and his breath hung in the frozen air. The sidewalks were quiet, save for a few people rushing home to get out of the biting wind. As he headed toward the water, the scenery shifted. The lively apartments and shops of the main strip faded into a graveyard of rusted metal and broken glass. This was the edge of the world, an industrial wasteland where the city hid its secrets. It was the perfect spot for cowards to hatch a plan without being disturbed. He arrived at the site at 11:35. It was a massive, 3-story brick shell that used to be a garment factory before the economy collapsed. Now, it was just a hollow skeleton sitting in a no-man's land. It was far enough from the residential blocks that no one would hear a gunshot, but close enough to the bridge for a quick run across the river if things got hot. Bumpy took a slow lap around the building. He spotted 2 high-end cars tucked away in the alley, expensive Buicks and Cadillacs that looked completely out of place in this part of town. Those luxury cars from out of state were parked exactly where Leo said they'd be. Bumpy noted the Connecticut and New Jersey tags. The front of the building was sealed shut with boards, but a heavy metal door at the back was cracked open just a few inches. That was their way in. Bumpy checked his watch, 11:40 p.m. He stayed tucked in the shadows for 5 minutes, as still as a statue, just listening. He could hear the low rumble of voices and the scraping of chairs against the concrete floor. They were getting ready. At 11:45 p.m., Bumpy tightened his grip, adjusted his hat, and stepped toward that back entrance. He didn't bother to announce himself. He just pushed the door wide and walked right into the den. The basement was dim, lit only by flickering lanterns hanging from the pipes. 15 men, all draped in white robes and masks, were gathered around a table piled with maps of the neighborhood. In the corner leaned a massive wooden cross, 6 feet high, next to cans of fuel. They were in the middle of a briefing. Their leader, a man named Silas Thorne who had come down from Connecticut, was pointing at the map. He was giving orders to target a local church right as the midweek service ended. But Thorne stopped talking because he saw Bumpy Johnson standing there. The room turned to ice. 15 hooded heads snapped toward the door. These men felt untouchable. They had picked a ghost of a building where no one ever walked. They hadn't even bothered to put a man at the door because they were sure no one knew they existed. Yet, there stood a man in a sharp suit, staring at them with the calm confidence of a king. Silas Thorne was the first to find his voice. He was a wealthy executive who ran the group's operations across the tri-state area. He had spent years organizing these raids and scaring families from one city to the next, and he had never been stood up to. Thorne pulled his mask back, showing a skinny face and a smug grin. He started to tell Bumpy that he had just walked into his own grave. Bumpy simply raised a hand. It was such a commanding move that Thorn actually went quiet. "Before you say another word," Bumpy said, his voice as smooth as glass, "you need to realize one thing. You've brought your circus to the wrong part of town." One of the younger men, acting on nerves, reached for a revolver tucked into his belt. Bumpy didn't jump or reach for a weapon. He just locked eyes with the kid. "If you pull that trigger, you better not miss," Bumpy warned. "Because if I'm still standing after the first one, you aren't getting a second chance." The young man's hand stayed glued to his side. Thorn tried to act tough again, pointing out that it was 15 against 1. He told Bumpy that even if he had a weapon under his coat, he'd be a dead man before he could even aim it. Thorn sneered and told Bumpy his best move was to turn around, leave, and pretend he hadn't seen a thing. Bumpy just tilted his head a fraction. "That's your first mistake," he said. "You think I'm here to talk terms." He took 3 long, steady steps into the basement. His hands were out in the open, and they were empty. "You've been bullying my people for months," Bumpy continued, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Torching rooftops, smashing glass, and scaring mothers. You figured we were too shook to strike back. You thought those masks and those badges in your pockets made you gods. You thought you were untouchable." He took another step closer. "You were dead wrong." Thorn's smug look began to fade into a nervous twitch. "Now see here, boy. Don't call me that." Bumpy's tone didn't get louder, but it got sharper. "The name is Bumpy Johnson. And by tomorrow morning, every coward in a sheet from here to the deep south is going to hear that name. Because the 15 of you are about to become a very loud lesson." A big, burly man with a thick accent stepped out from the group. "We don't have to take this from him. Let's just end this right." He never got to the end of that thought. What followed was a display of cold, surgical violence. Bumpy didn't move like a man panicking. He moved like a machine that had already run this simulation 1,000 times. When the big man reached for his holster, Bumpy was already on top of him. He delivered a single, crushing strike to the man's throat, collapsing his airway. The man crumpled to the floor, clawing at his neck, unable to draw a single breath. The nervous kid from earlier finally managed to pull his revolver, but his hands were trembling so hard the bullet hit nothing but the brick wall behind Bumpy. Without missing a beat, Bumpy grabbed a burning oil lamp off the table and hurled it. The glass exploded against the kid's chest, drenching his white robes in fuel and fire. The teenager shrieked, dropping his weapon as he tried to slap out the flames eating his clothes. The basement turned into a madhouse. 15 men were scrambling for their guns, bumping into each other, and trying to reach the exit that Bumpy was now guarding like a stone wall. What these men didn't understand was Bumpy's history. He wasn't a playground brawler. He was a graduate of the hardest prisons in the country. He had been mentored by old school lifers who taught him that winning isn't about muscles, it's about speed and hitting where it hurts the most. Bumpy didn't bother with body blows or boxing stances. He targeted the eyes, the joints, and the throat. He was there to dismantle them, one by one, and he did it with a terrifying efficiency that left no room for a comeback. Silas Thorne tried to get his crew to focus. "Split up. Circle him. There's only one of him," he screamed. Bumpy didn't hesitate. He grabbed that 6-foot oak cross leaning in the corner. He swung the heavy wood like a professional hitter. The oak slammed into Thorne's skull with a sickening crack, like a dry branch snapping. Thorne hit the concrete and went completely still. 3 more men lunged at Bumpy simultaneously. He used the cross like a pike, driving the jagged base into the first attacker's gut. Using that momentum, he spun the heavy wood around, smashing the second man's jaw. The third man managed to get close enough to snag Bumpy's overcoat. Bumpy let the cross drop, whipped a razor-sharp blade from his pocket, and sliced the man's face open from his temple to his chin. The man let out a high-pitched wail and fell back, clutching his face as blood sprayed his white robes. The fire from the broken lamp was hungry now. The old dry floorboards of the warehouse were catching quickly, and thick, black smoke began to fill the basement. The hooded men were choking and tripping over each other, blinded by the haze. But Bumpy moved through the clouds like a ghost. He had spent those 5 minutes outside memorizing the room's layout, and he knew exactly where everyone was. One after another, the men went down. Some were knocked out by Bumpy's strikes, others were accidentally shot by their own panicked friends firing into the dark, and some simply succumbed to the smoke. The entire struggle lasted only 8 minutes. 8 minutes from the moment Bumpy entered until the last man standing lost his footing. When the air cleared just enough to see, only 3 men were still breathing. They weren't in good shape, bones were snapped, skin was scorched, and they were covered in deep gashes. 12 bodies were scattered across the floor, taken out by the violence, the fumes, or the growing heat. Bumpy stood by the exit, his chest heaving. His expensive suit was shredded, and his skin was stained with blood that didn't belong to him. He looked down at the survivors. 2 were dragging themselves toward the door, while one just lay in a heap, sobbing. Bumpy walked over and knelt beside the closest one, a young man whose mask had slipped off, showing a face twisted with terror. "Give me your name," Bumpy whispered. The man was sobbing uncontrollably. It's Patrick," he choked out. "Patrick Murphy, sir. Are you from the neighborhood, Patrick?" Bumpy asked. The young man stammered that he lived in the Bronx. Bumpy leaned in close, gripping Patrick's collar until their faces were inches apart. "Then you go home to your family tonight. And you make sure every one of your friends in those white sheets hears exactly what took place in this basement. You tell them Bumpy Johnson walked into a room of 15 and walked out alone. You tell them this is the price for bringing terror to Harlem." He shoved Patrick toward the stairs and turned to the other 2 who were shivering on the ground. "That goes for you too. Get out of here and spread the news. This group isn't welcome in my city. Not today, not ever." The 3 survivors scrambled, dragged, and pulled themselves up the stairs and into the night. Bumpy followed at a steady pace. He took one final look back at the 12 figures on the floor, the smoldering oak cross, and the maps of the families they had intended to hurt, plans that were now nothing but ash. He stepped out into the freezing air, the orange glow of the growing fire reflecting off the dark surface of the river. By the time the sirens started wailing, Bumpy had vanished into the shadows of the industrial blocks, walking back toward the center of his world. By the time the sun came up, the factory was nothing but a blackened skeleton. Fire crews pulled 12 bodies from the wreckage. Detectives from the precinct arrived and headed straight to the hospital to grill the survivors. Patrick Murphy and the others were suddenly very forgetful. They claimed it was too dark to see anything and that the attack happened in a blur of smoke and shadow. However, the evidence left behind told a different story. The police found the remains of the robes, the hate-filled pamphlets, and the maps with black-owned shops and churches marked as targets. Detective Miller sat in the commander's office later that day, presenting his findings. 12 men dead, Miller said. All part of a secret cell, caught in the middle of planning a massive strike against the people of Harlem. The commander leaned back, flipping through the files. "What's the play here, Miller?" Miller knew exactly what the boss was hinting at. "We could dig deeper and try to find the guy who did it. But if we do, the papers get a hold of it. The headlines will say the KKK was running wild in New York right under our noses while we did nothing. The mayor will have our heads for the scandal. It makes the whole department look incompetent, or worse, complicit." The commander stared at the report for a long time. Finally, he took the papers and slid them into the back of a heavy desk drawer. "Call it an accidental fire," he said. "Case closed." A group of squatters gathered in a ruin, a fire broke out, and everyone left. "No arrests. Case closed." Officer Miller nodded. "Understood, sir." And just like that, the deaths of 12 hate group members were wiped from the books. The city officials decided that admitting a violent cell was operating in Manhattan was far more embarrassing than letting a vigilante walk free, especially since that vigilante had done the job the police were too lazy or too scared to do themselves. The 3 men who lived kept their word. They talked. Patrick Murphy returned to his group in the Bronx and told them everything. The news rippled out to other chapters in the surrounding states, growing more terrifying with every retelling. In some versions, Bumpy had taken out all 15 men with nothing but his knuckles. In others, he had trapped them in the fire on purpose. Some said he made them drop to their knees and plead for mercy before letting them run. The reality was scary enough on its own. Within 7 days, the group's activities in the area vanished. The letters stopped. The fires on the roofs went out. The broken glass was replaced and stayed intact. The cowards who hid behind masks realized that Harlem was no longer a playground for their hate. Bumpy Johnson had taught them a lesson they wouldn't forget. When his people fought back, the bullies bled just like anyone else. The events of that February night became a neighborhood legend. For decades, people told the tale of the man who walked into a lion's den alone and came out the only winner. To the local families, the story meant they were safe. It meant someone was looking out for them. To the other crews on the street, it earned Bumpy a level of respect that guns couldn't buy. He wasn't just a boss. He was a man with a code. To those who thought they could bring hate into the neighborhood, it was a warning that there would be a heavy price to pay. Many years later, in the 1960s, a journalist asked an older Bumpy Johnson if the legend was true, if he really took on a whole room of those men by himself. Bumpy just gave that same icy smile he had worn in the basement. "I'll tell you one thing about respect," he replied. "You never get it by asking for it politely. Being reasonable doesn't get you anywhere. You earn respect by making it crystal clear that the cost of crossing you is more than anyone is willing to pay." So, yes, I stepped into that room, and yes, most of them never left. They came to my streets to plant fear, but I showed them what true terror feels like. When the writer asked if he felt any guilt about that night, Bumpy's face remained a mask of stone. "Only one regret," he said. "I wish I could have made the point even clearer, but letting those 3 live was enough to get the message across." The group realized that Harlem wasn't scared of them. They were the ones who needed to be terrified of Harlem. On that cold night in 1934, 15 men gathered in a basement with masks and weapons, plotting to hurt innocent people. One man followed them inside. He had no mask and no army, just his hands, his fury, and a refusal to let his people be bullied. 8 minutes later, a dozen of those men were gone. 3 survived to tell the tale, and Bumpy Johnson walked back into the winter chill, past the empty factories and toward the center of the neighborhood, where families slept in peace because of his actions. This isn't just a tale about a criminal. It's a story about the moment a community decides it will no longer be a victim. It's about choosing courage over fear. The hooded men thought the neighborhood was soft and that the people would just bow down to their threats. They found out the hard way that they were wrong, and they never returned. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you want to hear more about the Bumpy Johnson history the textbooks tried to hide. These are the moments that turned Harlem into a legend. Leave a comment below. What would you have done? Would you have gone in solo like Bumpy, or would you have brought a crew? Make sure your notifications are on, because we're bringing you these legendary stories every single week. Next time, we'll tell you how Bumpy Johnson forced the great Lucky Luciano to show him respect. Remember, you don't get respect by asking, you take it. And Bumpy Johnson took his on February 8, 1934.